Willkommen, bienvenue, and welcome back to Programming Live with Light. Just ignore that little flub there. Programming. Yeah, we're gonna play with some shaders and try to make things pretty and awesome and weird and cool. Let's announce it over on the Discord. The Discord has been pinged. Always gotta wait a couple of seconds to make sure Restreamio's not just going to crash. It's also a little strange. That my preview disappears when I mouse over. Oh, the different OBSs. I see. I'm gonna have to see whether or not that comes through on the stream. It doesn't look like it. I think it's still fine. Okay. So let's go through what I have already done here. Actually, let's make a new copy of this because, well, it's good to have version control. And we're going to call it filters.shader because it's not strictly spoopy anymore. Let's move my mic so it's a little easier to see. Okie dokes. So, here at the top we have our uniforms. These are the things that we can change in OBS itself to modify how things look. Then we've got our main image function, which is the target. We get V in from it. And so that lets us do what we need to do. Now, I'm not 100% on this texture sampler here, and where that comes from and what it's able to do. Image.sample just lets us get the current value at this current location, and we put it into C for color. Then what we do is we turn it into hue, chroma, and luma. HCL is probably not the right word for it because L is usually luminance, which is a different thing than luma, and it's a big old mess. Second, these things are constants, so we should move them outside of converting to HCU because they are not part of the conversion. I believe this is nothing at all. Okay, now we get to another constant. So this luma right here is what we multiply by to get the luminous of any particular color. And so if you have 1, 1, 1, you add all of this up, you get 1. If you've got any other color, it adds up to something less, and that's just how this thing goes. And so from there, we've got our vibrance from our uniform, and we convert it a little bit such that it's more usable. Again, these are adjustments for later. Like, those are things that will get adjusted later. And so they are not part of the transformation process either. Now, for the actual transformation, MX and MN, the maximum of the RG and the B versus the minimum of the RG and the B. It's basically the chroma. Like, that is the definition of chroma. And so we have it separated such that it's easier to see, but we don't necessarily need to. Which comes to the first thing that I would like to test. Can we break these things onto multiple lines and not have it crash on us? So what I would like to do is this. So I'm going to save this. I'm going to go into OBS. And I'm going to modify the filter and switch it on over to this new file. Now it keeps the uniforms, thankfully, so we can change the way it looks on the fly. And so we have the new file loaded, and it still works great. Which means, instead of having MX and MN defined as more memory that needs to be taken up, we can just compute them. Actually, no, because we need them down here. So knowing that I can do this is nice, such that things become a little more readable, at least for me. Some people love just having it all in a line. I kind of like breaking it apart so you can see each of the parameters one by one. So when you've got dot, you don't necessarily need that. But when you have more than 2 parameters or each parameter gets a little big, not really worth it. Here we are calculating the hue. There's likely a more shaderific way of doing it, but for now we just wanted something that worked. And so here you've got the chroma. Here you've got the hue. And then we work with... Actually, we don't have anything that modifies the luma. Because the luma is... Wait a minute. We've got to. Because that's... V. No, that's the vibrance. L is working on this, which is working on n.z, n.z. Oh, here we are. We dot the color versus the luma. Yeah, I wasn't thinking straight. So you dot the color versus the luma, and that gives you, like, this is the luma constant. You dot them together, which multiplies the red times this, the green times this, the blue times that, and then adds them up, and that's how you get the luma of this color. So that's how we gamma later. So the hue would go here, but it's a big old messy thing, so we just set it to 0 to start, and then we figure it out and plug it on in. Then we have a modification section. We've got the sigmoid, which didn't really work. Didn't do what we wanted. And so now we've got a chroma gamma, which modifies the vibrance. It keeps bright colors bright, dull colors dull, but adjusts the rate at which things become dull. And here we have the luma and gamma. Same thing, but instead of the vibrance staying vibrant and the dull being dull, it's bright versus dark. It adjusts the rate at which things get dark. Let's move this back, I guess. I don't know. I don't know. I don't really like the way this is lining up. Okay, and then once you've made the modifications, you change it back. And so you start with your output color of nothing. Then you use this to recalculate the balance of colors from the hue. And then where you have Y, that's the chroma, how far apart the minimum and the maximum are. And then at the very end, you have to shift it to get back to the appropriate luma. And then right here, we have our color shift for the sepia. Because doing that sort of color shift in a hue-based space is difficult. Really difficult. So difficult that it's much easier to convert back to the RGB space, do the color shift, and then convert back as necessary. You just don't want to do this sort of thing in the hue space. It's very simple in the RGB space, not so simple in here. And even if you did, it would end up being probably computationally equivalent, if not worse. This way, it's at least understandable that you take a certain percentage of the sepia, and then the rest of it is the other one, and you just add them together. Easy peasy. Now, it's time to modify it, because it's not quite working the way that I want, and so we change it. Now, the problem that it has right now is that if I go into vibrance and change the exponent to negatives, it just goes weird on me. I don't really like it. And similarly with the gamma, I don't know. I just think it's not quite what I want. So, for example, if our vibrance is 0, like our vibrance gamma is 0, then we take our thing and raise it to the 0th power, which makes it 1. Which I don't think that's really what we want. Although that is not exactly what's happening, because we add 10 to what's in there. So really what we need to do is get it to -10. And on the luma, it's -20. So this is what happens when it's at what's effectively 0. And that's just no good. We want 0 to be the default, not a fail state. And so we're going to change it. We're going to change how it reacts here. And so we'll be able to change it here. So let's keep the scaling, because I like the scaling, such that we can just use the mouse wheel. But we're going to get rid of the shift, and then we're going to change how it's interpreted here. And so we're going to have it raised to the absolute power of this, which itself is raised to... is that the way I want it to do it? I think what I want is Okay, so Mac, welcome. Okay, so if it's less than 0 is when we do this. Otherwise, we leave it alone. And then we do the same thing down here with L. Now we reload the effect, set it to 0, and it's not right. Why is it not right? Oh, because it's still 0. Because it should be... B.X does, in fact, look like an emote. Okay, so when it equals 0, it should output 1. If it's less than 0, it should output a fraction. And so it should be 1 minus that fraction. There we go. Now if we turn this off, right, we still have it set to vibrance 85%. Oh, not 1,000%, 100%. And sepia of 34, sepia of 0. Okay, so now if we turn it off and turn it back on again, nothing happens, which is exactly what should happen at 0, 100%, 0, 0, 100%, 0, 0. Brilliant. And so now as we increase the gamma, it goes the wrong way. And in general, it's having issues. Never assume that it understands precedence. Okay, so this is also not right, because when this is almost 0, this is pretty much infinity, and that's very much not what we want. I think it's actually supposed to be like this. Okay, more vibrant, less vibrant. Brilliant. Now the real problem is the directions are backwards, because this is 100 and this is negative 100, and that's totally backwards. And so what we're gonna do is switch it around. No sense taking the absolute value when you know what the absolute value is. Also, we need to make sure that the letters match. Okay, 0, 100, negative 100. Brilliant. Let's swap it such that you can see the effect. So I'm just using the scroll wheel. Oh, jeez. So we reload the effect. We put it at 0. Brilliant. And then we can scroll it. Oh, it's broken again. Okay, so going down is fine. Going up is bad. Okay, so yeah, that minus is not what we want because it's positive on this side. Okay, so 0, and then we can scroll it up to make it more and more vibrant. But there is a limit to how vibrant it can get, because if we put in 1,000, 10,000, 1,000,000, it stops having an effect. So by the time you get to like 50, it's just done. Desaturating, like removing the vibrance, also it gets to a point where the absolutely vibrant bits, you're never getting rid of that. Like, they will always be that little bit of green. And so this filter will never completely desaturate the scene. It'll work pretty hard at it, but it'll never do it completely. And then with the Luma, you can brighten it up quite a bit. But the truly dark parts will stay truly dark-ish. Pure black, I think, would remain pure black, but we don't have any of that in this scene. And then if you go negative, boom, it gets real dark. But still not completely black. And so you can just make a nice little effect of having the sun go down. Where you start at 0, and you just scroll your mouse wheel down. And so, yeah, you can make a pretty decent sunset just by adjusting the Luma down over time. Because you still have that little bit of light from maybe the moon or something. But it does get a nice nighttime sort of feel. And then we add our sepia. And we're good to go. And so that's just a slight modification of what we had before, to make it a little more in line with how a user would actually use it. And so I did a little bit of work on the math side of things to make sure that this color shifting was the best way to do it. And it kinda is. Like, you could convert from this space, like this hue space, into a different three-dimensional space that still has Luma as one of the characteristics. And then you would convert the polar hue and chroma into a Cartesian something and something. I'm not sure they have good names. Like, you would just end up calling them A and B or X and Y. And then you could do this sort of blending in that two-dimensional space instead of this three-dimensional RGB space. And it is an equivalent transformation. But you don't gain a whole lot from doing that. Like, unless you're doing this a ton, you don't really gain anything. And even then, I'm not sure you're gaining much. And so we're not going to do that. It doesn't seem necessary. we're converting back anyway, we can just do this sort of blend at the end. The only reason you would do it some other way is if you wanted to do a blend like between these two. Like for some reason, well, I don't even know, because you would need to have something that would be impacted by this color shift, and your Luma is not. Your Luma is held constant during this sort of color shift, and so you don't have to worry about it. So if you wanted to color shift it before running it through your vibrance filter, and so we would run this part first and then run it through the chroma to desaturate the sepia itself, which I'm not sure is really necessary. And so that brings us to, what do we do now? We had one request over on the Discord, so if you're not a member of my Discord, there's a link down in the description. That's where I always ask, what do you guys want to see? Are there any ideas you want me to work on? And so we had a request for color isolation, which is as good a term for it as any, where there's a color that you want to keep and get rid of all the rest of it. So think that picture of the girl with the red balloon. So let's get into the game. Actually, let's turn off the sepia, because the sepia will make that a bit more difficult. Okay. This screen is as good as any to work in. Actually, let's just turn everything off. There's no need to mix the other stuff in at this point. So, step one. I would like to see what we get when we ask for a uniform float 4. Because this should ask for a color. And so, what are we going to call this? Let's call this ISO. Well, no. Because this is what will show up in OBS. What would we call this? Isolation targets. So save that. We go back into OBS. Reload the effect. And it is a color picker. So that's really good. The only trouble is the colors picked in RGB, and we wrote all of this in the worst way possible. So let's see whether or not we can write another function. So what do we call it? Float of a thing and a thing. So float for HCU, RGB to HCU of a color. And for now, just return C. Save it. And then reload it. And it breaks it. I need to see whether or not OBS has... I need to see whether or not OBS has an error log that I can go into to see what is going on here. Got examples. So I'm gonna do a quick Google search. OBS Studio error log. Huh. Well, that's convenient. Help. Log files. Show log files. Aw, that's cool. There we are. I certainly hope there's nothing in here that can cause serious problems. Okay, so there's a lot of things in here. I'm not sure any of it is going to tell me what I need. Nope. Whole lot of nothing. Well, that's no good. Yeah, because it's not crashing OBS, so OBS isn't getting the error. So is there a problem with the way I define this function, or does it not support... Oh, it's because I didn't give it a data type for the input. Do you like that better? Hey, it likes that a lot better. Okay. I don't work in strongly typed languages very often. And so... I run into trouble. Okay. Float for n equals RGB to HCU of C. Привет, Superkiller. Привет. It's not how I would spell привет, but c'est la vie. Which is a more appropriate response to that than one would expect. Okay. So, Luma. I should probably... Can I make Luma a const? Because that's the only external thing this needs, is this Luma. So I could move that out here and just make it a compile time constant, yeah? Nope. So the question is, was moving it outside the problem? Or was it missing in here being the problem? Or is it some other random problem? Oh, random problems. And when you don't have any sort of debugger to help you, okay, so what I'm going to do is return C here, such that it doesn't try to do any of the other things. And then I'm going to have it return C here, and see whether or not it's a syntax error. It is. What did we do? We returned N. Like, that's... I also might need to define this function earlier. There's certain languages that very much care the order in which you define your functions. Oh, this one doesn't care. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna cut all of that. Save it. Try to reload. Okay, so that's good. So there's something in here that it goes, that's no good. So it could be that it doesn't see Luma. Oh, it's because it didn't see Luma. Now, having it defined in both of these places is not good. Not good at all. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to make a const float for test equals float for of 1111. There we go. Am I hacking the game? No, Wolfer, I'm not hacking the game. I'm just putting a nice layer of color on top. And that broke it. Can we define just float test out here? Nope. Color hacking. I suppose color hacking is kind of accurate. So GLSL global const. Color or color? Yes, I'm fairly certain this will still work across the pond. Okay, so this explanation did not help in the slightest. Global variables don't exist. Yeah? But I want... Can you make a constant uniform? Huh. Can't get your OBS to stream a game without spending 5 hours setting it up, and I'm just hacking OBS itself. I know, right? It's just not fair. Really? Really, Pretzel? Skip. Pretzel's usually on point, but just can't abide that. Okay, so what if we make it uniform? Save. Reload. And it just does not approve. Oh, I broke something else. What did I break? How did I break it? Did calling it test break the system? Doesn't seem to have. But giving it a default value totally breaks it. Well, that's frustrating. Because I don't want to have to define the same thing in two different places. I will. I guess that's just what I'm gonna do then. I don't appreciate it. But if it's what we gotta do, it's what we gotta do. Okay. So now, if we reload the effect, okay, what just happened? Something ain't right. Oh, it's because I put in safety measures. Forgot to turn them all off. There we go. Okay, Vibrance Gamma. Brilliant. Luma Gamma. Brilliant. Ha, Crimson Court took over. Okay, so those two still work. Sepia still totally works. Is it weird you don't want to play starter with mods because it won't add to your played time counter? People value different things in their lives, and if you value your played time counter, feel free to play the vanilla game. It's plenty good on its own. What mods would you even add? I mean, really. Okay, so... Now, the question becomes, with the color isolation, how do we balance the gamma with the isolation? Do we isolate first and then gamma? Do we gamma first and then isolate? It's an interesting conundrum. Either way, while we think about that, I'm going to make the change back into its own function as well. From what we learned from this. HCU to RGB of color. Yeah, let's just use C again. And then in this space, we're going to find N and replace with C. Yeah, this is not what I meant. Okay. And then 4 of O. Equals HCU to RGB of N. What else? One isolation range. Yes, we're getting there. That we'll start with finding the color, and then we'll work on how to shrink. And we broke it. What did we break this time? We don't have Luma in there. Still broken. What else are we missing? Okay, so O is flowed. C, H, C, H, X, C, X, X, C, X, C, X, C, M. We have Luma, we have M. I never returned O. No return, no value. Still borked. Okay, what we're gonna do is turn C. Comment everything out. And hope for the best. Nope. Semicolon. Remember your semicolons, kids. Here I was thinking that was gonna do it. Sepia O.Z. Should work. I don't see why it doesn't work. Curses! So we're selling price on items. Yeah, that's good. Calendar anywhere. Also good. NPC map locations. That's a little creepy. Just knowing where everyone is all the time. Fast geode. Sure. Range display for scarecrow and sprinklers. That's a good quality of life thing. I kind of want that to be something you had to unlock, but sure. Victorian texture pack. In-game wiki. Okay. HCU to RGB. HCU to RGB. I forgot to put in the type. Welcome to my nature. I am not a strongly typed programmer. That was really pretty, though. I am creepy. So long as you're honest with yourself about it, I can totally accept it. Okay, so we have a thing. It exists. Brilliant. So we change back. Okay. Let's see. Because we need it to be able to have absolutely no isolation at a certain point, where it just gives you all of the colors back. But I also don't want it to be just a step function of is it the right color or not. I don't want it to be a sudden thing where if it's like cyan, there's a sudden cutoff in your cyan. I want it to be a relatively smooth thing. And so I think this might need to be another 3 parameters. Might be 4. Okay, so thinking about the wheel, you'll have the color that's your target, you'll have the color that's as far away as possible, and you'll have up to 180 degrees between your target and the color. You'll want a smooth drop-off to your threshold. And so you'll need a threshold and a gamma and a target. Is that all you need? Well, there could be an amount. Because maybe you don't want complete desaturation. Even past your threshold. Because we still need to be able to turn it off. So yeah, I think we need an amount, a threshold, and a gamma. And so 0 isolation will be just leave it alone. 1 isolation is complete desat. Threshold will be how far away you can get before it goes to the exact amount. And then the gamma will be for the curve of the isolation. Yeah? Yeah. And so actually, I want to see if I can move these down. Like, was that actually the problem we had that one time? It appears that it was. No putting them at the bottom. Alas. Okay, so... question becomes, how do we deal with isolation and vibrance? Do we isolate first? Do we vibrance first? Do we make them mutually exclusive? Do we have them interact with one another to not step on each other's toes? For now, let's isolate first. So what we're going to do is we're going to get the distance of the hue from the target. So that's n.x and isolation target. And what we want is hue distance, and that is a tan 2 of these two angles. Yeah? Save. Did we break everything? Of course we did. Because isolation target is in the wrong space. Will we need its hue after this? Probably. Okay, isolation hue is... Actually, we'll just call it I. Also, we didn't define this. Float 4 is RGB to HCU of isolation target, because we need its hue. And so it'll be I.x. There we are. And then, given this hue distance, we need to know how far away... No. We have this hue distance, then we need to see how much saturation loss we get given that distance. And so... this whole thing is if the isolation amount is more than 0. Because if it's 0 or less, we do literally nothing. Now, if the amount is more than 0, if HD is greater than our threshold, threshold is by default 0, so we want it to be 1 minus the threshold, and by 1 minus we want it to be 0.5. Wait a minute. Arctangent works in radians. Our angles are in 0 to 1. We have to find pi ourselves. Seems we do. I don't think I broke anything yet, so it should just... Of course it breaks. Do I need a semicolon? Nope, that's not it. What did I do? Okay. Okay, that didn't break it, so it was the definition. How about I just put it right here? This is the only place I need pi. Okay, save that. Reload. Broken! Float? Okay, didn't like the double, so we use a float. Okay. And then we go with if HD is greater than or equal to isolation threshold. Do some stuff. I know you're not supposed to branch in shaders, but we'll do better jobs with shader specific things like 1 minus, because if it's 0, we want nothing to happen. HD divided by M pi 2. Arctangent doesn't care about multiplicity because you're taking the ratio of two things. And so it doesn't matter if you multiply those by 2 pi. But your output will be an angle, and it'll be in radians, so we need this right here. Okay. Or we could just multiply this by 2 pi. I think that'll feel better. Times this thing. And now our threshold, let's divide by 100 because percentages, everyone loves percentages. So if the distance is farther than this percentage of the circle, again, we don't want it to be quite that far because we want it to be half of the circle. So we just want regular old pi. So we'll take just regular old pi. And so if it's more than a certain distance, else do something else. So we'll have ny times a certain amount. How much? A certain fraction of a certain line. And so the fraction will be HD divided by that. Like, that's exactly what we're looking for. So we should pre-compute this. And then check if f is greater than or equal to 1. Because we compute this fraction of the distance. Is this correct? So HD will be an angle up to pi. Divided by pi is a fraction between 0 and 1. Isolation threshold over 100 will be a fraction. 1 minus will still be a fraction. Multiply the two together. Is that really what I want? So this is the total distance. We want to divide. Because this will be like 1 over 2. Because this should be smaller than this to get a smaller than 1 result, which will have shape. Otherwise, we will just return 1 minus isolation amount over 100. So when isolation is 0, it does nothing. When it's greater, it multiplies it by a number smaller than 1, which makes this smaller. And it's the complete isolation amount. Down here, it will be some fraction of the isolation amount. Which fraction? This fraction. Roughly. Is that accurate? Yeah, so really we just need to clamp this at 1. GLSL clamp. Should work. So let's save this, make sure it didn't make any errors. Of course we did. Semicolon, kids. Semicolon. And so we really just clamp it. And then, so we need the min val and the max val. So we're going to clamp this between 0 and 1. Didn't break it, so that's good. And so then that gets rid of the if. And so now it's going to be f times the isolation amount. Because if the f is 0, then nothing changes. If f is 1, we remove the whole isolation amount. And then f itself is linear in how close you are to where you're going. Brilliant. So now, if we increase the amount of the isolation, you can see the colors just going away. Okay, now let's choose blue. Said blue. And now blue let's turn off the other effects. Okay, so this is not quite doing what we wanted. because at isolation threshold 0, it should get rid of colors. But now I'm scrolling through the threshold numbers, and it's only getting rid of blue. Which, admittedly, is cool, but it's treating the isolation target as red and doing a bad job of everything. So let's select red and see if it does the same thing. Oops. Okay, so it's doing the same exact thing no matter which target we choose. Which means somewhere in here, it is not giving us what we need. So either in choosing the isolation target or in figuring out the distance. So what we're going to do is return isolation target. Make sure it knows what we're doing. It knows what we're doing. Okay, what we're going to do is then return HCU to RGB of RGB to HCU of isolation target. Also red. Good. Okay. Now we're going to return float 4 of HD, 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 1. So this is how far away it is from our isolation color. So the darkest spots are the most red, and then if we select blue, green. Yeah, this is not measuring what it's supposed to. So what we're gonna do instead is calculate it manually. What we're gonna do is we're going to take the difference between the hues, just straight up difference. We want the absolute difference between the hues, and then if it's greater than a certain amount, we need to flip it to the other side. So if HD is greater than 0.5, because you can only ever go halfway around, then HD equals what? So let's say it's 0.6. Means it should be 0.4, so 1 minus HD. Because these are measured from 0 to 1. We want the absolute distance, because the direction really doesn't matter to us. Okay, let's save that. Reload the effect. Well, that's no good. What did we do? What did we do wrong? It has to be positive. Okay, so let's get rid of this. And it just gives us white. That's strange. So let's do n.x, i.x, and then hd. Let's just do n.x. What? RGB to HCU. Oh. Do I have the hue on a 360? I do. Why is it on 360? I know this is inefficient and stupid, but I don't like it being on a 360 scale. Everything else is on a scale of 0 to 1. So should this. Ah, there we are. So now we choose a color. Let's choose blue. So the dark is what's closest to blue. And then we pick red. Brilliant. Now we can get rid of that. Reload the effect. Okay. So we put the isolation threshold at 0. So it's still not working exactly right, but it's working better. Because eventually it gets rid of everything, but right now it takes a while before it starts to eliminate any of the color. And it really only does it through this threshold. Not anywhere in between. And I had hoped that this right here would give me a nice straight line.
So
Okay, so minimal effect. And then once we get to 50, still pretty minimal effect. Like, at what point do we start seeing an effect? Like, we're still seeing stuff at a threshold of like negative 200. Like, it's visible there at negative 900. It's not easily seen, but like negative 300, you can definitely see it. Okay, at 100, it's completely gone. At 0, like, it keeps getting brighter. Oh, because it can never get the whole way the way this is set up. Okay. I still think it should be division. Which doesn't seem to make any change. HD is no longer an angle. There we are. There we go. That's what's supposed to happen. Now if we come back in here, take this part off, save it, and then reload the effect. And then we shift the threshold. It gets rid of all of the color except blue. And eventually blue as well. Like, it'll get rid of every color that isn't literally the color we picked. Okay. And it's a smooth function because we've got colors that aren't red. Well, I don't know. Like, are the ones that are farther away from red being culled proportionally? It's kind of hard to tell. So now what we're going to add is pow of f to the isolation gamma. But we're going to do to this isolation gamma what we did to the others. Which is this. And so if we reload, nothing should happen. As it should be. Now, if we change the gamma, we should be able to change how it reacts to colors that aren't itself. So we can put the threshold back to 0. Let's actually get that backwards so that you can see. Okay, so now we've got the isolation threshold of 0. So we're at complete isolation 0, 0, which means we should theoretically have some desaturation going away from red, but it's not particularly significant. If we increase the isolation gamma, you can see everything that's not red start to fade away. Brilliant. And now, if we want to go the other way, we can kick the threshold up a bit. And you're like, okay, the sky is gone now. We can kick the isolation gamma into the negatives to get a steeper curve of isolation. And so you can have a really steep curve at blue where you have part of the sky really blue and part of the sky really gray. Okay, so let's do 0 and about 50, 30, 25, and then choose a different color, blue. And then choose yellow. Choose like brown. Let's go for a nice brown color. Yeah, it's kind of hard with brown. Oh, yeah. You can see the isolation amount does change things a bit. It was pretty subtle to begin with, but when you have 100 and then you got 0, it is pretty significant. It's just not noticeable. It's really subtle. Okay. So that's pretty successful. Where if you just want a particular color or set of colors to stand out, there you are. Wouldn't have called that, wouldn't have called what? The difficulty with brown in particular is that its hue is not particularly interesting because it's orange. Like, brown is just dark orange. And this sort of color isolation doesn't take into account the saturation of the color you're trying to isolate to. It just takes the hue. And so if you wanted brown to have more an effect, you would need to pick, like you would need to adapt the algorithm to adjust for the saturation of what you're trying to match to. And then desaturate things that are even more saturated than it is past it. Like, it's weird. The biggest problem I see is that it doesn't change it in real time. So when you're trying to pick a color, it won't change anything until you hit OK. But let's actually go in and take a look at how it looks with the color isolation. Here's Jimbo. What am I using to make this stuff? OBS has a shader filter plugin that you can download and install. And then you give it a shader file, and it will run the shader for you. So yeah, it's a pretty subtle effect. So that's almost normal. And then with a threshold of 68, certain things are still perfectly ordinary, and other things are slightly desaturated, and other things are almost completely desaturated. Like any of the bluish greens are seriously affected. Like these stones right here are supposed to look like that. And then to write the shaders, I'm just using Notepad++. Shaders are just text. Nothing fancy. So yeah, with the color isolation and without. So yeah, I really should look into the color blindness filters and implement a couple of those, because this is the sort of thing that it would likely do, is where it does some interesting stuff to make you go, oh, wow, you really can't tell those things apart. And so we have aggressively desaturated certain colors. And then let's Let's apply our other filters. And then maybe a touch of sepia? Maybe a touch less Luma, a little less on the Luma Gamma? Maybe wash it out a little? Actually, the washing out is kind of okay too. It's not my personal aesthetic, but I could see people really enjoying it. So yeah, here we are with our new filter state where certain things like these plants are aggressively desaturated. The trees, however, when they're nice and red, and the barn and whatnot, get to keep quite a lot of their red flavor. As opposed to natural, just downright blinding now. There it is with the filter. Basic, welcome back. How's it going? We've got ourselves a bit of hue isolation. And so now the greens and blues are hit harder than the reds. But if we wanted, we could turn that around with a simple color selection. Now, unfortunately, there aren't a whole lot of blues. Chick-fil-A for dinner. Nice. Yeah, so here... that's a bit too aggressive. And so we're probably not going to want to use the blue. Let's try the green. And so with green isolation, the green stuff really kicks. Yeah, it only works in OBS itself. It does not affect the game. But when I'm playing on stream, I'm watching, like I'm playing from the OBS preview window. And so I see it how you see it. So here, this tree was vibrant red in the other one, and the plants were really desaturated. Now this one feels a lot less natural to me. Like, this feels really awkward. So let's try to pick something in between. So let's pick a nice yellow. And now it's super balanced between the two. Because that's the primary color aesthetic of this game, is that you don't have a lot of really kickin' blues. And so we've dulled the water a lot. Yes, the game itself is normal. The stream and what I watch and read chat from is shaded. And what you see is shaded. Because I don't have a way of loading the shaders into Stardew Valley directly. There probably is a way with the mods and whatnot, but for now, I'm more interested in doing this in OBS for the sake of OBS. And so, yeah, particularly in the fall, color isolation on yellow will lead to duller reds, duller greens, vibrant yellows. This is a very fall filter. Do I know anything about Fallout New Vegas? A little bit. I watched Northern Line play a little bit of it a while back. But yeah, I think as a filter, I kind of like the red isolation with a little bit of vibrance reduction. Can't decide who to join. That is a tough question. Okay. What we're going to do is we are going to switch to the other one because it is a different season and a different shirt, and see how it looks over here. So we've got a very red painting, a nice looking fire, a lovely shirt. And now that it's winter here, you get less of the super fall interest. Whereas in winter, if we picked, say, blue, the water is really vibrant, which is just kind of freaky. Well, see, Jimbo, what I think you're not understanding is that I don't play this much on my own, and so I am seeing it. Legion's right out. NCR, yeah. Yeah, Mr. House sounds kind of annoying. I personally would run just myself. But if I had to go with a certain group, NCR might be who I go with. The other problem with the color isolation is now the chests aren't really identifiable. So we probably want to kick the vibrance back up. Maybe kick it down just a touch. Yeah, like about there is probably where I would have it for the winter time. Such that you still get the crocuses, you still get the plant life, but you get a little extra punch of blue. So let's try it back on red. Because in town, the red is pretty nice because you've got candy canes and you've got mats and you've got signs, you've got ornaments. Yeah, in town the red is pretty good. I think it was just the vibrance gamma being so low. You got a whole lot of nothing. So yeah, I think the red isolation is still good, even in the winter time. You just need to not have the vibrance quite so low. Yeah. Yeah, let the vibrance be a little bit higher. Let the red isolation do a bit of work. That's good. There is a program, I believe it's called Reshade, that can hack into the rendering context of whatever you're playing and do this sort of shading. But it requires certain things of the program that you're running. So, yeah. Actually, I'm going to kick down the threshold and kick up the gamma. Such that we still get the colors, they're just significantly washed out. And then turn off the vibrance gamma. And maybe use the vibrance max? No. Nah, because I think I like the full vibrance of the red. You think you've successfully found the worst website ever? You mean GeoCities still has some things that are live? Okay, so normal, filtered. Normal, filtered. Let's try isolation gamma of a negative number. And then increase the threshold. Yeah, that green goes from green to nothing real quick. That's neat. Okay, so this is with 0 sepia. Yeah, I do like that. UK website about a talking gnome that has mystical properties or something. Interesting. I just saw a thing, like an email from Netflix that was like, hey, there's a new thing you might want to watch. I'm pretty sure it was Netflix. And it was basically some kid who was recruited by talking gnomes to save the world. I'm like, my wife would like that. What? I don't know if it was a movie or a TV show, but it was about somebody who moved into a house and there were talking lawn gnomes and they recruited the kid to help them save the world. I don't know. That's how these things go sometimes. Okay, Mac. I might still be here. I've got a couple of other ideas I want to try. Okay, so I'm gonna copy this code from Stack Overflow because that's how this game works. And what I want to play around with is noise. And so we've got a function here that gives us basically Gaussian noise. But I don't necessarily know the range over which it's given, so I'm gonna have to take a look at what we get from this. So we're gonna save this, and then reload our shader, make sure it doesn't break everything. Brilliant. Then we're going to open up the example shaders, because these likely have something interesting in them. Okay, so the blink shader has time. So elapsed time is something we are likely to need. And then does border have something interesting? So I'm guessing this right here is the current coordinate. Yeah. 10 Google searches. No Malone. Yes, TV show on Netflix. Yep, that's the one. They sent me an email about that, and I'm like, fascinating. Okay, so what we're gonna do is just to test this out, we are just going to return, what did they call it? Random or not? Rand of v sub in dot uv. Let's call that R. Return float for of RRR1. So this should just give us the snow channel. It does not. Why not? .xy. Broken. Okay, so the dot product fract of all of this. So this should return a number between 0 and 1. After watching the trailer, it seems to be the spiritual successor to the likes of Monster House and Coraline. Coraline was really good. So if it's trying to succeed Coraline, I have a feeling my wife would absolutely adore it. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to comment that out and see if that's the problem. Not the problem. So is this the problem? Clearly the problem. So is it a type issue? So it's a type issue going in or coming out? Oh, it's sending in a vec2. Okay, step one, just make sure the rand function works. Never mind. It's like a crossover between a cruddy typical high school movie and some garbage you'd see on Teletoon or YTV. I don't even know what either of those are. It sounds fantastically terrible. Huh. So... still having trouble. So it's not a syntax error in here. What we're going to do is return 1. Quote, let's keep this smooth, like smooth little babies. Teletoon is like more of a high budget Cartoon Network with 10 times more cartoons? That sounds amazing. Where do you get such a thing? Benny has the best dialogue in the game. Which game? Who's Benny? Why can I not send in a float 2? Like, do float 2s not exist? Does it not like me calling it Rand? That's not it. What is the problem? Float of R equals a thing. What is your problem? Oh, there's a thing in here that it doesn't like, and it didn't not, and it only hated it when it tried to run it. Is it fracked? I bet it's fracked. Yep, it's fracked. It doesn't like fracked. Fracking. Oh, my alarm's going off. Don't Google search things. Dismiss my alarm. Okay. But he's got a shot to steal your platinum chip. Oh, Canada. Johnny Test. I've seen thumbnails for that. Okay, so yeah, fracked is the problem. So we need to figure out what fracked does. and how to replace it. Returns the fractional part of x. Same as x minus floor of x. Ah, don't do that. Does it not like floor? Okay. Y, int y equals x, turn x minus y. No? Just call it f. No. Right. Strict typing. There we go. Save it. Brilliant. Float to co. Save. Of course. Now what? It was going so well. Okay, so can't call it with nothing in there, so let's call it with flow for of just that. Okay. Can we send that in? No. Can we send that in? No. Can we send in that? No. Can we send in this? No. How about this? Ah, that's a thing we can do. Can we make a float 2? Yes. Okay, we now have a float 2. and we call it rand like we wanted to from the beginning. Yes. Will it break if we uncomment that? Sure will, boss. Return 1. Fixed. Fixed. Return floor of 1. Broken? Not broken. So fract. Fract totally works. So where's the problem? We've got, oh, vec2. That's the problem. Hey, we've made some progress. Now we should be able to just show some noise. Welcome to the Snow Channel, home of snow. Now the question becomes, is that the resolution of noise that I want? Or do I want to make it bigger? So what if we did... floor of this times 1280, and this floor of that times 720. Doesn't seem to have done much. Ah, okay. Yeah, I see. There we go. Big fat noise pixels. Now the question is whether or not they are between 0 and 1, or if they are positive and negative. Okay, so what I'm going to return is noise, abs of noise. 1, 1. RGB. So let's just call it noise there. Okay, so it's still black and white, which means it does not go into the negatives. Okay, so what we're going to take is this random number. And what we're going to do is we're going to subtract 0.5 and multiply it by 2. And then we're going to do the same return, and now it should be colored. Actually, it should break. But we'll see in what way it breaks. No, that's good. I like it. So now we have positive and negative values between -1 and 1. And so then we're going to noisify the hue. So H equals H times noise. And then how much noise do we want? Let's say 0.1. Oh no, we broke it. We don't have an H. It's n.x. Well, that's really weird. We don't want to multiply, we want to add the noise. It's also not great. And we don't want to divide by 0.1, we want to multiply by 0.1. There we are. And now we have little bits of color noise. Let's turn off all of the other things. And we can make some uniforms. Sorry, you couldn't see that, could you? Gonna make a couple of uniforms for color noise. And so then let's make the noise when we need it. Color, noise, amount, color, noise, size. Oh, we broke